Alright guys, welcome back to VALORANT News. Major roster news as to what G2's roster is going to look like going into the second stage of this season. We know that Leaf had his health issues that made him not travel to the eSports World Cup that Heretics eventually won, and if he's not back in time in just a couple of days, there are rumours as to who the replacement might potentially be. Demon1 is the name going around, and there's some reason to believe this may well be true, in addition to a map pool change, which might well majorly shake up the second half of the season. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty we're going to get into. Starting just quickly here, the database officially reflected the fact that Mixwell no longer on Team Heretics, but as he says, rather late to the party on that one. But yesterday, another big roster update really, although let's be honest, this has been coming of course, is that Mindfreak is no longer part of Paper X. It was difficult to imagine that we'd ever really see the day where this would be the case given his tenure on the organisation. When there was talk that they were trying out Patmen, the rumour was they were looking to replace either Mindfreak or potentially Jing. Eventually, it was Mindfreak who was mainly the one stepping out of the team when they tried Patmen, and then all of a sudden they realised, damn, you know, Patmen's pretty good. The team feels like it's in a better spot without Mindfreak right now. Not to say that a team with Mindfreak wasn't great and they didn't achieve great things because they did, but obviously having won the event out in Toronto, you know, there's now no looking back for the organisation, and they've decided that keeping on Mindfreak as their, you know, sixth man on the main roster doesn't make too much sense, so they're officially moving him to reserve, and as a result they're giving him the opportunities to explore other options as well. So you know, it's a big step. It was obviously expected really, as Mindfreak says, hey everyone, as you've probably seen, they've allowed me to explore and listen to options as a player. They've treated me very well and really professionally, and obviously they're going to be happy about the fact that their orgs now achieved that great international success. So you know, it's understandable they want to allow Mindfreak his opportunities to go somewhere else and explore options, but it's still pretty difficult to see the end to the era in some respects of Mindfreak as part of that team. Zelsa said, let's build, right? So who knows? I mean, it is very interesting to see a player of Mindfreak's caliber out there on the market, all the success that he's had. And, you know, maybe there's a world in which they bring in Patmen, the team resets to some degree, but Mindfreak then comes back in and they also go on a great run. It's maybe not impossible. So I think Mindfreak will be a very interesting consideration for other teams out there. Whether Sentinel's Mindfreak is ever a possibility seems a bit of a stretch to me. FNS says, best of luck, can't wait to see you back on the stage again. So it is probably going to happen at some point. Time will tell when, where, and frankly with whom on the rest of his roster. This is pretty interesting as well. Don't know what you guys' thoughts are on this, because if you're a Fnatic fan, are you happy with the last month or are you devastated? Yeah, I think the truth is probably somewhere in between, but it is interesting because Derke was asked the question, Fnatic losing 2 grand finals, that make you sad, or how does it make you feel? Because of course he was off the team, replaced by Kayak. Now he's always going to have some love for those guys. I'm sure on some level when Fnatic, because this is just how it is to be a human being in my opinion, like there's no one who's a competitor who isn't like this in my opinion anyway. But when Derke was effectively released, like they, you know, dropped him kind of, they decided that Kayak they thought was going to be a better option. They wanted to make a change. Derke was the one they removed. They brought in Kayak, and of course, you know, Crashy's coming in. The team has changed quite a lot, but when Kayak was struggling early on, I'm sure there was part of Derke that was like, you know, like that's what happens if you drop me type thing. I don't think you're ever going to get away from that internal feeling as a player. But obviously you're still going to have a lot of love for those guys and want them to do well. Maybe Derke doesn't think like that, but, you know, I have a hard time believing that. But I'm sure today, Derke, now he's safely settled into Vitality. Maybe that team's going to move in a good direction now with the changes that they have made, with Safe stepping out and everything else happening. We know that this is the new roster of 5 going into the second half of the season with Kovac, Unfake, Kicks, Derke and less. But he says, you know, he's happy that they're making a couple of finals. But I guess if you're a Fnatic fan, you know, you can't be happy about losing 2 finals, especially not getting reverse swept by the Heretics in the way that they did. But maybe for Fnatic it's just a stepping stone, right? Because if you're a Fnatic fan, you'd much rather lose Toronto, lose the World Cup in the finals, but then win champions than the other way around. So we'll see if that happens. This, though, another big update of yesterday. Rumour has it we have another update to the map rotation. Now, when this is coming in, I don't know. And that's really interesting because Stage 2, today's the 15th, Stage 2 starts again today. Tomorrow the Chinese stuff gets underway. We're a couple of days away from when the Americas gets underway again. But presumably stage 2 is going to be run on the same, map set we just had. But for stage 2 playoffs and presumably for champions, we might get another change. Now, this is very interesting that they're doing this. Rumor has it, Icebox is going to be gone and Abyss is going to be coming back in for the end of the season. Now, my thoughts on this in general are that I think it's very frustrating to be a player in this environment. If they bring Abyss back, they'd better have made some changes to it. If they bring it back as it is, I'm actually genuinely going to be annoyed, because I think that this idea of Riot making these changes for seemingly no really good reason seems to imply that the only reason to me that they're doing this is purely to add an element of randomness, to be honest. Now, I know that you could argue, and maybe it's fair to argue, that the teams need to be prepared for multiple different maps. I mean, this is basically what it was last year, but instead of, Corrode is now in the map pool, instead of Icebox as it has been previously with a similar type of map pool. But it's very confusing that they'll just drop a map and bring another one in and give the teams a map pool which is, pretty out there going into the, the biggest tournaments of the year. I understand that they want to introduce maybe a level of chaos, and also that the teams need to be well prepared everywhere if they want to succeed. But still, it doesn't really strike me the right way, if this is true, of making a major map set change leading into the biggest tournaments of the year, when the teams don't necessarily have as much time to practice. Some teams in various regions will have more time than other teams to practice. And I think there's just an overall feeling here that when they make these changes, given the way the season is structured, it never really turns out to be particularly fair. So Abyss, Bind, Ascent, Sunset, Haven, Corrode, and Lotus. Rumoured that is going to be your 7 maps for towards the end of the season. Boaster says Abyss, he's not happy about it, right? And this is another thing. Fnatic have just made 2 back-to-back finals. Icebox was a part of that. Icebox was a very commonly played map. I'm not the biggest fan of Icebox, I'll be honest, but it is a commonly played map. It's a frequently seen map in competitive because the teams, they may not like it massively, but it plays functionally for competitive play. And I don't mind watching it, and we see a lot of it in competitive. But the fact that Icebox is set to be gone and Abyss is coming back in, I mean, I don't like Abyss. I think it's awful, personally. So I'm hoping that they change something about it for it to replace Icebox. But as ever, intrigued to your opinion in the comment section below. This, though, is the big conversation point around G2. So they have been the best team in the Americas for a little bit of time, but unfortunately for them, they went out to the World Cup. They played with their assistant coach instead of Leaf, and they got absolutely bodied, slammed out in the first round. Now, this was the tweet on the 5th of July that confirmed Leaf has been experiencing health issues and is currently going through some treatment. Per the doctor's orders, he will not be travelling to the EWC. So that's what happened. He didn't go, and now the team is back because they got bodied out on the first round straight back on the plane. But as we know, in only a couple of days, the second stage is about to get underway, and this was on the 5th of July. Of course, it wasn't long after that because it was the 8th of July that the tournament started. So, we didn't know, we still don't know what these health issues look like for Leaf, how long we can expect the treatment to happen. Maybe it's a few days, maybe it's a few weeks, maybe it could be longer. I don't know. Obviously, we're very much wishing Leaf the best. What I will say about this is that Leaf has not said anything about it. If you go to his profile here, even his replies, he did actually do a tweet on the 14th of July. The last one before that was on the 1st of July. Don't really know what he's talking about here because it was in reply to a tweet that has now been deleted. But, he's not said anything about what's been happening, the health issues, when he might be returning. We've not heard anything of the sort. And therefore, it's raised questions as to what G2 are going to do. Is Leaf going to be back in about 3-4 days for their matchup, or is he not going to be ready? And if he's not ready, and even if he might be ready, they still need to have a potential replacement in mind. So this is where things have got interesting, because the other day, Demon1 did a tweet and says looking for a team as a sentinel, and, well, there were some interesting replies, let's say, to it. We had Valin say, yo, and Demon1 drops the salute emoji, and maybe could be a little bit of a reuniting here between Demon1 and Jorgamo, a rather successful duo back in the day on Evil Geniuses. this was spotted too, that Demon1's account here on Valorant Tracker, book reader, now has a G2 logo on it. So either this is a nice little elaborate ploy for Demon1 to kind of pretend that he's going into G2 and it's all just a nice little inside joke really. But, you know, there are a few reasons to believe that this might well be possible. And there was also, you know, this mentions, and Valin kind of implied that, yeah, maybe Leaf isn't going to be back in time, and therefore somebody's going to have to come in, and Demon1 could be a reasonable candidate for it. So there's been quite a lot of talk about this over the last 24 hours or so, and it does seem to be a not unrealistic possibility, right? Especially with Valin in reply to the tweet, you know, because he tweeted this Demon1 at 10 PM on the 13th of July, and then Valin replied on the 14th, you know, okay, 4 AM my time on the 14th, right? So yeah, definitely evening in the States, but still, I mean, it was a good few hours later. Like, he wasn't immediately there. It was a good few hours later he then replied to the tweet, and I don't know, sometimes when things seem so obvious, you might think, oh, well, surely there's no way, but if they're making it pretty clear, it would make some sense, right? It might well make some sense for Demon1 to come in. And honestly, I think that team would be really exciting to watch. So very much interested your thoughts in the comments, because that is the going rumor right now, because G2 have not said anything in addition about the situation with Leaf. You know, they've kept it very much under wraps. Leaf has not said anything about it. The implication seems to be that they will maybe need a replacement for at least a little bit of time, and assistant coach didn't make sense, and didn't make sense out in the World Cup. So maybe Demon1 is the option there, and that would be quite the team. A couple of scrimmacks to go through. NRG weren't actually up 52-3. It was 5-3. But they were, interestingly enough, up, where was the scoreboard? Yeah, they played QOR, and they were up 11-0 here. It seems that way anyway. Yeah, the NRG roster in that one. There was a couple of other interesting scrimbucks that apparently they went 23-1 against QR, so it was 11-1, and then they won 12 rounds in a row. So I don't know about that, but apparently over 24 rounds they may have had a rather dominant scoreline there on NRG, so maybe getting better and better since they've come back from the World Cup. And this is also pretty interesting. Just going into the second stage, keep an eye on 2Game Esports, right? Keep an eye on them maybe being a bit more competitive, because we know that the Xolos Laser team, they've been looking rather good. Been considered one of the key threats in the Americas for Ascension, and they were down 10-0 to that new 2G team that are potentially making a wave. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.